Good morning, everybody. Right, we are on the clock. Thanks for joining us. I was going to say you've lucked out because this was going to be the session where you're not sweating profusely, but I was wrong. But it's also the session where it's not socially acceptable to drink rosé yet. So we're going to have to make the content good. Now, look, the thing that I got most excited about today was for this morning's session was that I get to talk about the Wienermobile without getting in trouble. So exciting stuff ahead. Look, thanks for joining us. We are going to talk about passion points, which I think that's a brilliant area for us to really get into the weeds about in a world where, we've just been talking about AI on stage, where the machines are taking over. Actually, like, passion points are arguably more diverse than ever. But the challenges faced by marketeers in order to engage consumers through their passion points is arguably getting more challenging based on how we're able to target, how we're able to really drill into the nuance of individuals. So, look, having Jess from Kraft Heinz and Jack from Carat, an amazing couple of people to get into the space. Jess, I will let you introduce yourself, so please kick off.
Hi, everybody. I am the Vice President of Creative Capabilities and Innovation for Kraft Heinz North America.
Okay. Jack?
Thank you.
Fantastic. I'm Jack. I'm Jack. I'm a global client lead and our head of digital data and technology at Carat, which is part of Dentsu International.
Marvellous. Well, welcome, both of you. So look, we're going to kick off and talk a little bit about sponsorship and experiential passion points. So Jess, this is my first legitimate question, which includes the Wienermobile. Sorry, I'm very immature. With activations such as the Wienermobile and Indy 500, at the Grammys with Mustard, what's the one insight that you continually lean on to keep these activations authentic and keep them going?
Great question. I think it's a little bit of a cheat at the answer to the question, but for us, the insight to getting to this great work is actually about the intersection of three truths and three insights. So it's understanding what is the brand or product truth that can make an activation ownable to us? What's a consumer truth, something that they really care about? Like, one question we ask ourselves a lot is, like, would real people care about what we're doing? Is this something not that you're going to see on TV or just like experience in your feeds, but it's the type of thing you can imagine you're going to tell your friend about? And then there's a cultural intersection that we look at. What's happening right now in culture that makes what we're doing, like, the why now to do it? So how many of you know what the Wienermobile is? Okay, good.
That's way too many. Not enough people.
As I was speaking with my friends here with their accents, I was like, I might have a real difficult time explaining any of my examples because they're all just like so uniquely and bizarrely American. But for those of you who don't know, we have this extremely long hot dog, which we call wieners, on wheels. And it's something that our founder, Oscar Mayer, back in the early... I'm a little bit of rosé. I'm not positive the year that he did it. But he created this marketing vehicle that was truly a vehicle. It was this enormous hot dog. And it was just this really quirky way that the brand showed up in culture and tried to disrupt what was going on in order to sell hot dogs. And it is this huge brand icon in American culture. It's one of these things, when it rolls up, you can't help but smile. And so we know that about our brands. We know that the passion point of some of our consumers is NASCAR, so the very uniquely American racing circuit. And the biggest event, arguably, of the year is the Indy 500. So we saw all of those things coming together. The Indy 500 happens on Memorial Day weekend, which is the start of our grilling season for hot dogs. And so we decided to put our fleet of 6 Wienermobiles, and most of the world doesn't know we have more than one, but we put all 6 of them on the track at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, and they did a race all around. And if you know Will Buxton, maybe that's one that I can get more international. He used to be the F1 announcer and just made the switch over to Fox Sports and NASCAR. That man and his passion, if you like wiener jokes, go and listen to that recording. They had such a blast. This thing got 6.8 billion impressions between everybody sharing it. And anyway, long-winded way to say it's truly it's not one insight about anything we're doing. It's really understanding where you can understand your consumer and what they care about. You know what your brands can do in that moment, and that there has to be that why now. Like, what's the thing happening in the moment that can really help it light on fire?
Love that. Jack, in terms of challenges when activating sponsorships, what do you see from an agency perspective?
It's a good question. I think, as Jess touched on, there's a vast gap in badging to actually doing a sponsorship that means something to your brand, but also to consumers. And I think doing it without that sort of cultural resonance or any sort of context around the why is kind of pointless, right? There's no need. And a lot of the brands we work with, including Kraft, do it so well where they activate around a subject. And it's important to understand people as, dynamic humans. I'm a massive football fan. I obviously follow the Champions League, which many of our kind of clients sponsor, which is great. I think the challenge there is, you've got to be cognizant of when people want to dial up and engage with that and when they don't. I, as an Arsenal fan, obviously sometimes as an Arsenal fan, which is great, sometimes have a brilliant day and all I want to do is consume content around the Champions League when we're winning. There are days when we get knocked out of the competition where I simply don't want to consume any of that at all. So it's really hard to know when people even, fiercely passionate about that want to engage and when they don't want to engage. And I think understanding the context in which people operate in is super important to that. I think the challenge that a lot of brands have is, what do I do around it? And again, it comes back to an understanding of culture, but also an understanding of people. So what does this sponsorship mean to people? How do they want to engage with it and interact with it? And I think if you're not doing any of those things, it simply becomes a visibility exercise, which is fine. But, often sponsorships are very, very expensive. Activations of that sort are also going to require a level of investment. And I think it's really important to invest behind the activation as much as the association and the sponsorship itself.
Brilliant. And that is a marvelous segue into talking a little bit about authenticity. So, to your point, you can spend a bucket load of cash on sponsorship and you can hope that it's going to kick off. You've already talked about billions of impressions that you've gained, which is obviously testament to a hugely successful activation. But I think even more so in this world where every brand wants to create some sort of viral moment, keeping a level of authenticity becomes more and more challenging. Now, again, some great examples. Am I allowed to sing and go peanut butter jelly time? Some great examples from Kraft Heinz. But how do you guys continue to keep that level of authenticity, ensure that you're storytelling appropriately and create resonance with the audience?
Yeah, I think something that we at Kraft Heinz have done over the last 4 or 5 years is really go back into our brands to not rebuild them, but reimagine them in a modern world. We're very, very privileged to have brands that have 100+ year legacy and some newer ones, but there's a risk in, number one, if you're not reevaluating your brands and how they're coming to life in the world, they can get very dusty and feel quite old and irrelevant pretty quickly. And so every marketer comes in and wants to think like, okay, how can I be relevant? How can I show up in a way that will put me adjacent to these moments that people are actually talking about? But the trick is, if you change who you are as a brand to do that, you really run the risk of coming off as inauthentic, looking like an ad, which consumers don't want ads. They want content. They want things that entertain them. Or you can also just come off as kind of this brand that actually is just like this wannabe trend chaser that will talk about anything. So we really, for our marketers, look to ensure that they deeply understand the brands, what its values are, what its tone of voice are, and what's really core to its DNA. And then you're almost speaking as the brands. When I show up in different social feeds as myself, as Jess, I was going to say when I show up at work, I'm the same person I am outside, maybe not. But on my own feeds, I have to sound the same. I'm not 8 versions of myself depending on the platform or the message that I'm giving. There's a way that you talk. There's values you express. And that's extremely important to us when we're looking at our brands and having them come to life in moments. So, one example that we had recently is actually we have a frozen potato brand called Orida. And we were the inventor of the tater tot I hope everyone knows beautiful, glorious things that are just like mounds of potatoes clumped together and fried. And we invented those back in like the 50s. And during the March Madness tournament, which is NCAA college basketball in the United States, has this massive tournament that even if you're not a fan, you watch. And the storytelling that happens in those moments, it's incredible. You have the Cinderella stories, the teams that were like a 14 seed and are making it to the top. In that context, we actually had a star player on one of the college teams mention in a post-game interview that his great-grandfather was the inventor of tater tots. And we checked it out, and it was true. And our team just immediately jumped on it. And we we did an NIL deal with him. And it was a Cinderella story that fit the moment of like, here's this guy who, a fantastic basketball player, but otherwise like more or less a nobody, just one of the pack. And we brought him up and we celebrated him. We gave him like the Michael Jordan treatment, called him Air Richie. His name was Richie Saunders. And we broke through with brand recognition at the top of the pack versus the actual sponsors of the NCAA tournament for like 0.4% the spend. And it was just because it was a very authentic, real moment that, you know, the brand knew how to act in that moment, and they knew how to tell a story that really fit the times.
Love that. Jack, from your side of things, let's talk a little bit about data and technology. And
My favourite.
Your favourite thing, your subject matter of specialism. What are those data points? What is the technology application in order to plug into human moments, to make sure that you identify passion points, to make sure that the activations and that cash is well spent?
It's a good point. And again, it comes back to understanding people, right? I think there's a massive shift in our industry that we're seeing towards, you know, you've got one camp over here that's very much around static IDs. And that's okay for some things, but IDs are reductive by their nature. They're one-dimensional. They might tell you who someone is, but they're not going to tell you why they're doing something, or the understanding that we talk about the multitudes of signals that make up someone as who they are. So it's important to understand that people are dynamic. You know, we are different people, but we might be in the same place, but we might all have very different views on things. We might consume content in different ways. It's important to have a broad range of data signals. It's not just about an ID. You have to stitch those on. And I think context is really important, right? If we understand where I am, what I'm searching for, what I'm browsing, what I'm consuming, that's super important. And that, like me as a person, will change very dynamically. I will be doing something very differently this afternoon versus this evening versus tomorrow. And it's important to understand, cohorts and how people consume that. I also think Jess makes a really interesting point around the tie into authenticity is you can't do that unless you're plugged into context and cultural signals. And again, you guys do it really well with GumGum in terms of contextual signals. I think Reddit do it really well from a kind of cultural data perspective. And when you bring those two things together along with other data signals, suddenly you're starting to build a much richer understanding of people, not just individuals, but cohorts. And actually, it's a really interesting space where you start to build almost a community understanding. So what's going on? I don't like the word community, but cohort sounds a little bit more clinical. The idea that you can plug into, we might all say, for example, like cooking, but why do we like cooking? Is it because we're cooking to, show our love for friends and family? Is it because we have aspirations to be a professional chef, etc.? There are so many ways in which people express their passions. Understanding those data points and mapping those distinct communities and what will resonate with them is super, super important. That's the data side, the really sexy side. The less sexy side is the technical side, where you have to bring that together in one place. And again, there's a kind of shift in our industry of do it all with AI. It's probably not the answer. AI is prone to hallucinations unless you have the right guardrails and parameters in place. It's quite difficult. You've got to bring that together with some form of identity, a data spine. You've got to bring in those other sort of signals, and then use AI to be able to extrapolate that out to get as close to a full market view as possible, so you can then go and activate and critically go and push that to platforms. So the less sexy side, but ultimately one of the most important sides of it.
I asked you guys earlier if I could go off piste a little bit, so here's my moment.
Here we go.
You're talking about data, technology, the sexy stuff. Jess, from a Kraft Heinz perspective, obviously there's a ton of data that you guys have access to. How do you sort of take that data, create something which really ties into passion points, that's creative, that feels unique, Like, how is artificial intelligence influencing your ability to do that storytelling? Like, where does it sort of start and end sort of human input versus technology input?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'd say we have a ton of data available to us at Kraft Heinz, and the challenge is how you can sift through that and actually translate the data into insights. So to Jack's point, like, knowing one thing about a person does not tell you how to activate against them. You have to start to build those sort of profiles and the shape around them. And so we have an in-house agency under me called The Kitchen in North America that does all of our like social listening, but it's like social listening for the times. Like, it's not simply about hearing what people are saying and responding in the moment in the feed to feel like we're an active brand. We're actually starting to gather things that we're learning about the audience as we speak with them. You can start to do some understanding and hypotheses testing of, hey, we're gonna post. It's like an A/B test, but against your actual audience on like the themes to understand. To your point on cooking, like, we know they cook, but we don't know why they engage with us around cooking. So you can just test a couple different pieces of content, see the engagement that you get, see the comments, and we don't have a full system yet to backbone that, but we are looking at building different AI tools, some proprietary to us, some with our great partners, that will help take all of these different signals. And I guess the two challenges we have are, the first I talked about, there's too much data that you have to make actionable. It's also really possible to get siloed. So we have, our agency and our brands in North America, we have about 23 brands that we support in a meaningful way. And you can have any number of brand marketers, external agency partners, our internal agency, all working. And those individuals are building a persona and a mindset and an understanding in their head. But if we can't break down the silos and have information sharing in the moment in an agile way, and even over the long term as people change brands or change teams, you lose a lot of knowledge. And so we're looking at how we can use AI to help just build a much more nimble way. The goal is one day you can actually build like brand personas that you can chat with. So if I'm about to post something on behalf of Heinz or behalf of Orida, you can train a chatbot that's going to just talk to you like Heinz and really help you with that. But until then, it's really just about teams, number one, recognizing it's not data, it's insights that we need to action. And then just create a culture of sharing and trialing and learning.
Brilliant. Jack, let's talk a little bit about measurement. You're working with...
Another really sexy topic.
I mean, yin and yang.
You don't want me to take this one.
Yeah, it is really yin and yang, isn't it? The fun stuff, the boring stuff.
Well, we had to temper you somehow.
Hey, look, if I'm the boring guy, that's fine.
It's all marvelously exciting, Jack. Don't downplay yourself. Let's talk a little bit about measurement, though, and particularly let's dial in towards attention. So how do you see attention being applied across the brands that you are measuring towards outcomes, trying to drive sales? What are the other data points that you consider significant and most important today?
It's a good point. It's the battleground, right? If you're doing stuff and people are not paying attention, there's limited point to doing it, right? I think we're all past the point of understanding the value of attention. I think now we're at the kind of point of, okay, what does meaningful activation around attention look like, right? And again, if you think about before, the ability to bring those data signals together, the ability to use AI to understand people, you've then now got to activate in places and spaces where attention is rich. The challenge with that is you're never going to, there's no silver bullet, right? There's no ability to just put it all in sort of one channel, one platform and guarantee attention. Every platform has different levels of attention elasticity. So you've got to build, I guess, same way you approach standard media planning, you've got to account for those kind of spots and dots of where attention is going to be higher, but potentially more expensive, but then also where it's going to be lower and potentially more cost-effective, etc. It's really difficult, and I think a lot of it comes down to experimentation, trial and error. I think when you think about measurement frameworks, you have to have the place in the kind of systems in place to track and optimize and report against that. If you don't do that, and again, there's many providers out there that are helping brands do this, that's the first step. You have to be kind of measuring it. I think then it's a conversation with, executive leadership when it comes to marketing functions in terms of, are we orienting ourselves around the right KPIs and metrics? Are we going after reach or even resonant reach or relevant reach still? Fine. Are we able to then move towards a more attention-based outcomes kind of bidding model? Are there different incentives you might apply to your agencies or your buying teams that are searching for that? That's the next kind of frontier, really putting skin in the game and actually, your money where your mouth is when it comes to it. And that's a hard step for, many legacy brands who have KPI frameworks, measurement systems that have been there for many, many years. It's slow, it's hard to change. And it ultimately takes a very brave marketing kind of leader to say, we're going to completely transform how we do this. And this is our kind of new North Star or new currency of how we want to optimize and trade media.
I think there's such a contentious discussion to be had around attention, particularly with regards to passion points. And it's challenging. Like, everybody wants to drive attention, but the challenge is how do you earn attention rather than force attention? And again, particularly when you're doing something which is so personal in amongst somebody's passion. Jess, from a Kraft Heinz perspective, like, what signals are you looking towards, and how do you sort of understand, measure outcomes, particularly with these big activations?
Yeah, it's for us, it's not successful if it doesn't drive the business. So, and that can be hard to measure, especially in some of these activations that I've been talking about, which are maybe like a 48, 72-hour window of things happening, and you don't always see that read. Like the Orida, the frozen potato NBA or basketball example I gave. We actually in that moment saw an 18% lift in sales in the greater area in Utah where the college was, and then in the region we saw a 9% lift. And that's just something, like, thankfully our customer teams can help us understand that, but you don't always have that. So what we typically look at is, yes, in the moment we want those impressions, and the goal of these activations that we do is it's not to get a trip here. It is nice to touch a gold lion, but that's not the point of it. It's truly about, in our case, we have brands that most Americans know. If you ask them, they know our brands. They just don't think about them. Not until they're at the shelf and they're trying to make a decision, and they're going to make the decision based on price. So our job when we're doing these activations is really to drive that top of mind saliency. Can we have people more likely to recall our brands, to be thinking about them earlier in the consumer journey? And so we do look at measurement on, are we converting people down the funnel? Are people thinking about us more often? Are we driving choice at shelf in ways that we can't attribute to the other work that we're doing? So we try very much to not only look at the impressions in the moment, not only look at some of the efficiency measures and effectiveness measures that we see from a media buy, but on that, the long and short of it, like, can you drive the short-term sales? Can you drive the long-term brand health? We're looking at a range of metrics to make sure that we're not just out in the world making noise and having fun.
And that's so rare, because so many brands don't have a function where they can link that back to even brand health or even sales and commercial metrics. And actually, brands who are doing that are winning, because you're able to then, again, optimize against it. It's such a common thing of, we can do something in media, but how are we knowing if it's having a business outcome? And if you can bridge that gap, great. Otherwise, you need to, again, orient your marketing teams around making that happen. Otherwise, it's kind of pointless.
So we have a minute and a half left. Jack, I'll go with you first. If there was one takeaway from all of the chat that we've had in this last 30 minutes that you'd like everybody to, be thinking about whilst they're up and down the quasar, what would it be?
I think when you're activating around a sponsorship, you have to activate around a sponsorship. You have to go more than badging. You have to understand people as their full selves, not reduced to static one-dimensional IDs. And again, the ability to bring in multiple data sources to understand people and those cohorts and communities is fundamental to driving your brand and business forward.
Marvelous. Jess?
For me, it's the knowing that intersection of who is your brand, who is your consumer, and when is the right moment to act. And then one build that I hadn't shared yet was just, we really try to push our teams to experiment. So try things. And maybe even more importantly, don't wait until you have something that you think is absolutely perfect, because you're never going to move and it's easy to get scared and paralyzed. So I think if you know those things, which as marketers you should know your brand, you should know the consumer, and the culture piece is relatively easy to keep an ear out and listen. Just try things. Try small, see if they build, see if they grow. You'll never learn unless you do it. And so I just try to encourage people to be brave. If they know those things, they can do it.
Love that. And I'd argue that's probably one of the reasons why Kraft Heinz is so successful, the braveness that you have to talk about the Wienermobile. I mean, it's a big step. But look, thank you everybody for coming to listen. Hopefully this has been enjoyable. I've been able to say Wiener a number of times. Amazing. It's 10 past 10, so we can go and drink a rosé. Marvellous.
Thank you.
Thank you.